Marcus Thompson had exactly three things going for him at the Galactic Survival Academy. First, he was the only human in a class of 47 aliens who looked like they'd stepped out of a fever dream. Second, he had opposable thumbs, which apparently made him exotic enough to get accepted into their exchange program. And third, he was either the bravest student who'd ever enrolled or the most spectacularly oblivious. The smart money was on oblivious. "Welcome, cadets, to your final examination," Commander Thrak announced, his voice carrying the warm, encouraging tone of someone reading a funeral eulogy. The hulking, purple-scaled instructor stood 8 feet tall and had more scars than a discount furniture warehouse. Behind him, a holographic display showed what looked like Hell's Vacation Resort, Kepler 442b, also known as that place where hope goes to die. Marcus raised his hand. "Quick question, Commander. Is there Wi-Fi down there? Because I've got a pretty solid Netflix queue going." The classroom fell silent except for the sound of 46 aliens questioning their life choices. Vex, the insectoid sitting next to Marcus, nervously rubbed his 4 hands together. His species, the Chitauri, were known throughout the galaxy for their meticulous preparation and attention to detail. Right now, Vex looked like he was calculating the exact trajectory of his impending doom. "Marcus," he whispered, "do you understand what we're facing? Kepler 442b has a 90% failure rate. Students don't just fail this course, they get evacuated in medical pods, sometimes in pieces." 90%? Marcus pulled out a worn notebook and started scribbling. "So you're saying there's a 10% chance this goes well? Those are way better odds than my last Tinder date." On his other side, Quinn the Saurian puffed out his chest plates in what his species considered a display of confidence. Quinn had been bragging for weeks about his superior reptilian genetics and how his ancestors had survived the great asteroid event of Soros Prime. "Fear not, mammals and invertebrates," he declared. "The mighty Saurian physique was forged in the crucible of natural disasters. I shall lead you all to victory." "Right," said Blorks from the back row, his gelatinous form quivering with pessimism. "Because nothing says natural disaster survivor like a species that went extinct from a rock falling from the sky." The Glorbanian had the distinction of being the galaxy's most accomplished professional worrier. His people had turned anxiety into an art form, and Blorks was their Michelangelo. Commander Thrak cleared his throat, which sounded like gravel being processed in a blender. "As I was saying, Kepler 42b represents the ultimate test of survival skills. The atmosphere is toxic, the wildlife is aggressively carnivorous, and the weather patterns include acid rain, electromagnetic storms, and occasionally localized gravity reversals. You will have minimal equipment and 72 hours to demonstrate that you've learned something useful during your time here." He gestured to a pile of standard survival packs that looked about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Each pack contains basic rations, water purification tablets, a emergency beacon, and a copy of "So You're About to Die Horribly," a practical guide. Marcus looked at the packs, then at his own backpack, a beat-up hiking bag covered in patches from various Earth national parks. "Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Already packed." "Cato Thompson," Thrak's eyes narrowed. "The equipment provided has been specifically designed and tested for hostile environment survival. What could you possibly have brought that would be more suitable?" Marcus unzipped his bag and started pulling out items. "Well, let's see. Granola bars, because everything's easier when you're not hangry. A frisbee, because you never know when you might need to entertain yourself. Wet wipes, because personal hygiene is important even when facing mortal peril. Oh, and a portable lawn chair, because if I'm going to potentially die, I'm going to be comfortable doing it." The classroom stared at him in the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for natural disasters or really bad karaoke performances. Vex's compound eyes bulged. "Marcus, this is a survival course, not a camping trip." Tomato, Marcus shrugged and continued unpacking. "Sunscreen, phone charger, emergency chocolate, and..." He held up a small bottle with a proud grin. "Hot sauce, because if you're not living life with a little spice, what's the point?" Commander Thrak looked like he was reconsidering his career choices. In his 40 years of teaching survival courses, he'd seen students bring everything from molecular disintegrators to prayer beads, but never had anyone shown up with what appeared to be picnic supplies and the casual confidence of someone heading to a weekend barbecue. "Cadan Thompson," Thrak said slowly, "are you aware that the last human to attempt this course had to be evacuated after 6 hours? He spent 3 weeks in the psychiatric ward afterward, and he still wakes up screaming about the carnivorous moss." "Huh?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Did he bring snacks? Because low blood sugar can really mess with your decision-making." Blorks let out a noise that might have been a laugh or a death rattle. I like him. He's going to die, but at least he'll do it with style. As the transport ship's engines hummed to life outside, 47 students prepared for what might be their final exam. 46 of them were running through last-minute survival protocols and updating their wills. Marcus was checking to make sure he'd brought enough sunscreen. The transport ship's landing on Kepler 442b could best be described as controlled crash with optimistic intentions. Marcus stepped off the ramp and immediately understood why this place had a 90% failure rate. The air tasted like battery acid mixed with regret, the sky was the color of an infected wound, and everything seemed to be either on fire, melting, or actively trying to kill them. Well, Marcus said, breathing through his shirt, this is definitely not getting 5 stars on TripAdvisor. Around him, his classmates were already implementing emergency protocols with the kind of panicked efficiency that suggested they'd rehearsed this moment in their nightmares. Vex had deployed what looked like a full hazmat setup and was frantically checking readings on a device that kept beeping ominously. Quinn was striking heroic poses while his environmental suit's systems ran diagnostics. Even Blorks had managed to look more pessimistic than usual, which was quite an achievement. According to my atmospheric analyzer, Vex announced, his voice muffled by his breathing apparatus, the air contains 17 different toxins, 12 of which are classified as immediately fatal to most known life forms. The other 5? Marcus asked, pulling his lawn chair out of his backpack. Those are just probably fatal with prolonged exposure. See? There's always a bright side. Marcus unfolded his chair with the satisfied air of someone who'd thought ahead. Anyone want a granola bar? I've got peanut butter chocolate chip. The first disaster struck exactly 17 minutes after landing, which Marcus noted was actually pretty good timing compared to his last camping trip with his college roommates. The ground beneath Cadet Zilf the Crystalline began to bubble and hiss. And before anyone could react, what had looked like solid rock turned into a pool of something that definitely wasn't water. Acid springs, Quinn observed with the tone of someone identifying a mildly interesting cloud formation. The planet's crust is unstable due to volcanic activity. Standard protocol suggests we move to higher ground immediately. Zilf, meanwhile, was sinking into what appeared to be naturally occurring battery acid, while making sounds that the universal translator was politely rendering as expressions of distress. His crystalline structure was already showing signs of degradation. Emergency beacon activated, Vex announced. Extraction in 30 seconds. Marcus watched this unfold while munching on his granola bar. You know, on Earth we call that natural selection in action. He paused. Also, has anyone considered that maybe we shouldn't be walking on surfaces we haven't tested first? I mean, I'm no expert, but that seems like survival basics. A shimmering teleportation field enveloped Zilf just as his molecular structure reached critical dissolution. One moment he was there, the next he was presumably back on the Academy medical bay, probably requiring extensive reconstruction therapy. Hum down, Blorks muttered. 46 to go. At this rate, we'll all be evacuated by dinner time. Speaking of dinner, Marcus said, anyone else getting hungry? I pack sandwiches. The second disaster came in the form of what the Academy's survival manual classified as aggressive flora. Marcus preferred to think of them as plants with attitude problems. They looked like oversized Venus flytraps that had been crossbred with bear traps and given anger management issues. Cadet Norvok the Tentacled made the mistake of brushing against what appeared to be an innocent fern. The plant immediately wrapped around his appendage with enough force to make a boa constrictor jealous, while simultaneously releasing spores that made Norvok's skin change colors in ways that definitely weren't natural. Carnivorous vegetation, Quinn announced, consulting his datapad. Protocol suggests immediate amputation of affected limbs, followed by antiseptic treatment. Or, Marcus suggested, pulling out his water bottle. You could try this. He squirted what appeared to be ordinary water at the plant, which immediately released Norvak and recoiled as if it had been burned. Everyone stared. Lemon water, Marcus explained. Most plants don't like citrus. Plus, it's great for hydration and vitamin C. 2 birds, 1 stone. Norvok's extraction beam activated before anyone could process this information fully, but Marcus gave himself a mental point for creative problem solving. By the time the acid rain started, Marcus had settled comfortably into his lawn chair and was providing running commentary like he was watching a particularly entertaining nature documentary. And here we see the Galactic Academy's finest, demonstrating why theoretical knowledge and practical application are 2 completely different things, he narrated to no one in particular. Notice how Cadet Blix is following protocol by seeking shelter under what appears to be a tree, not realizing that the local flora has evolved to channel corrosive precipitation directly onto anything stupid enough to hide beneath it. Sure enough, Blix's shelter began dripping something that was definitely not water, and definitely not healthy for his chitinous exoskeleton. Emergency extraction for Blix, Vex announced unnecessarily, since the teleportation field was already activating. That's 3 down in the first hour, Marcus observed, consulting his notebook. At this rate, we're looking at complete class evacuation by tomorrow morning. I'm giving the current survival rate a solid 6 out of 10, points deducted for lack of creativity, but bonus points for the dramatic timing of that last acid burn. Quinn, who had been maintaining his confident posture despite the increasingly obvious dangers, finally cracked. How are you so calm about this? We're literally surrounded by things trying to kill us. Marcus looked around at the hellscape of acid rain, carnivorous plants, and unstable ground, then back at his increasingly panicked classmates. Well, yeah, but I've been to Australia. This is basically Tuesday in Queensland, except with slightly better weather. He pulled out his phone and held it up. Anyone want to be in my survival vlog? I'm thinking of calling it Humans Will Literally Pack a Lunch for Anything. The phone somehow had 3 bars of signal, which was more than most of his classmates' emergency communicators were getting. Nobody volunteered to be in his vlog, but Marcus noticed that fewer of them were following standard protocols, and more of them were starting to watch what he did next. Day 2 brought new horrors, as promised in the brochure that nobody had actually wanted to read. Marcus woke up in his improvised shelter, which consisted of his lawn chair reclined to full horizontal, a tarp he'd fashioned from emergency blankets, and what appeared to be several local creatures serving as voluntary security guards. "Morning, everyone," he announced to his remaining classmates, who looked like they'd spent the night fighting a war against sleep and losing badly. "Anyone want coffee? I brought instant." Vex, who had managed to survive the night by following his species' traditional protocol of build an impenetrable fortress and pray, emerged from what looked like a high-tech cocoon made of emergency supplies. "Marcus, how did you sleep?" The temperature dropped to -40 degrees, the atmospheric pressure fluctuated wildly, and the local predators were howling all night. "Yeah, about that," Marcus said, gesturing to a pack of what the survival manual called nightmare wolves, but which were currently lounging around his campsite like oversized puppies. "Turns out they're not actually howling, they're singing. Badly. I think it's some kind of territorial thing, but mostly they just want someone to harmonize with." He demonstrated by letting out what could generously be called a howl. The wolves immediately joined in, creating a sound that was part nature documentary and part karaoke night gone wrong. "See? It's all about communication." Quinn, whose superior saurian genetics had gotten him through the night but left him looking like he'd been through a blender, stared at the scene. The manual specifically states that the local canines are pack hunters with a kill success rate of 97%. Right, but it doesn't say what they're hunting, Marcus pointed out while scratching behind the ears of what was presumably the alpha wolf. Turns out they mostly hunt these underground root vegetables that are apparently delicious if you know how to prepare them. The howling is how they coordinate their digging. Very sophisticated, really. As if on cue, one of the wolves dropped a collection of purple tubers at Marcus's feet with the proud expression of a dog bringing back a stick. "Good boy, Ter," Marcus said, because apparently he'd already named them. "Who's a good apocalypse wolf? You are." The morning's first disaster came in the form of what the Academy had classified as atmospheric anomalies, but which Marcus immediately recognized as Tuesday in Kansas. The electromagnetic storm that swept across their location would have fried every piece of electronic equipment the students were carrying, if Marcus hadn't noticed the way the local wildlife was behaving. "Heads up, everyone," he called out, pulling a selfie stick from his backpack and extending it to full length. "Storm coming, you might want to turn off your gear." "How could you possibly know that?" Vex demanded, frantically checking his atmospheric readings. "My instruments show clear skies for the next 6 hours. Marcus pointed the selfie stick toward the horizon, where it immediately began crackling with electrical discharge. "Static in the air, plus look at the plants!" Indeed, the carnivorous vegetation that had been so aggressive the day before was now systematically closing itself up like an umbrella factory going out of business. "Plants don't have weather satellites," Marcus explained, "but they're really good at not getting fried by lightning. Basic evolutionary pressure." When the electromagnetic pulse hit 3 minutes later, 32 students had to activate their emergency beacons as their life support systems failed. Marcus, meanwhile, was using his selfie stick as a makeshift lightning rod, while live streaming the storm to his social media accounts. "And that's why you always pack analog backup systems," he told his phone's camera. Today's sponsor is preparation, common sense, and always having a plan B that doesn't require a power source. Lorx, who had somehow managed to avoid evacuation by the simple expedient of expecting everything to go wrong, oozed over to Marcus's shelter. I have to ask, how are you doing this? Doing what? Surviving. Thriving, even. I've spent my entire life preparing for worst-case scenarios, and you're treating this like a vacation. Marcus considered this while offering Blurx a granola bar. I think the trick is not fighting the environment. Everyone else is trying to impose their technology and protocols on a planet that clearly doesn't care about either. But the planet's been here for millions of years. It knows what it's doing. So you're adapting to local conditions instead of trying to terraform your immediate vicinity? Exactly. Plus, I brought snacks. The afternoon brought what the survival manual dramatically called megafauna encounters, but which Marcus preferred to think of as meeting the neighbors. A creature the size of a city bus, with more teeth than a dental convention and claws that could open cans, emerged from what everyone had assumed was a hill. The remaining students immediately began implementing Emergency Protocol 7, which involved a lot of running and screaming, not necessarily in that order. Marcus pulled his frisbee out of his backpack. Marcus, what are you doing? Vex shouted over the sound of enormous footsteps. That's a Class 5 apex predator. The recommended response is immediate evacuation. Hang on, Marcus called back. I want to try something. He flung the frisbee in a perfect arc toward the massive creature, which stopped mid-charge, tracked the disc with eyes the size of dinner plates, and then bounded after it with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever at a dog park. The apex predator caught the frisbee, brought it back, and dropped it at Marcus's feet while making what could only be described as happy rumbling noises. Ha, Marcus said, scratching his chin. Turns out apex predators can get bored too. Makes sense when you think about it. You're at the top of the food chain, no natural enemies, plenty to eat. What do you do for fun? The creature sat down, which caused a minor earthquake, and waited for Marcus to throw the frisbee again. You play fetch, Marcus concluded. Who's a good giant murder lizard? You are. By evening, Marcus had accumulated what appeared to be a small zoo of supposedly deadly creatures, all of whom seemed to think he was the most interesting thing that had happened to their planet in centuries. His classmates, meanwhile, were discovering that their survival manuals were apparently written by people who had never actually been to the places they were describing. I don't understand, Quinn muttered, consulting his datapad for the 14th time. According to this, we should all be dead by now, multiple times over. Maybe, Vex suggested tentatively, the manual is wrong. It was the kind of statement that would have gotten him expelled from the academy under normal circumstances. Suggesting that officially sanctioned survival protocols might be flawed was tantamount to academic heresy. Marcus, who was currently teaching his pet apex predator how to play dead, looked up from his impromptu training session. Or maybe the manual was written by people who never bothered to actually talk to the locals. He gestured to his collection of supposedly deadly wildlife, who were currently engaged in what appeared to be an interspecies game of tag. Turns out, most things don't want to kill you. They're just trying to get through their day, same as everyone else. The trick is figuring out what they actually want, instead of assuming they want to eat you. As the sun set over Kepler 442b, painting the sky in shades that definitely weren't found in nature anywhere else, Marcus's survival camp looked less like a desperate last stand and more like the galaxy's most dangerous petting zoo. And for the first time since arriving, his classmates were starting to think that maybe, just maybe, there might be more than one way to survive. Day 3 arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train carrying bad news. Marcus woke to find his usual menagerie of friendly neighborhood death machines acting skittish, which in his experience was never a good sign. Terror and his wolf pack were whining and pacing, the frisbee-loving apex predator was hiding behind what used to be a small hill, and even the carnivorous plants had closed up shop entirely. Well, that's not ominous at all, Marcus muttered, checking his phone for the morning weather report. Partly cloudy with the chance of imminent doom. The remaining students, now down to a hardy group of 12, had spent the night in what Vex generously called Marcus's safety zone. It was an area roughly 50 meters around his lawn chair where nothing seemed interested in murdering them, possibly because everything was too busy trying to get Marcus's attention for belly rubs and snack dispensation. Marcus, Vex said, his compound eyes reflecting genuine concern. Something's wrong. My atmospheric readings are showing massive movement patterns converging on our location. How massive? Marcus asked, though he was pretty sure he didn't want to know the answer. Massive as in, something the size of a small building is headed this way and it's bringing friends. Quinn, who had completely abandoned his superior Saurian confidence in favor of what appeared to be existential dread, was frantically consulting his survival manual. "Emergency Protocol 12, he announced, with the tone of someone reading his own death warrant. When faced with a Class 7 extinction event, students should prepare for noble death with dignity." Class 7? Blorks perked up with the kind of professional interest only a career pessimist could muster. "I didn't know the scale went that high." "It doesn't," Quinn admitted. "They added it after the first expedition to this planet." Marcus stood up from his lawn chair and squinted at the horizon, where something that definitely hadn't been there yesterday was making the ground shake with each step. It looked like someone had crossed a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a blender, given it anger management issues, and then fed it nothing but energy drinks and existential anxiety for about 50 million years. Okay, Marcus said thoughtfully. "That's definitely bigger than anything I dealt with in Australia." The creature, which the Academy had apparently classified as Planet Killer Class Megafauna, but which Marcus immediately dubbed Big Dave, stood roughly 4 stories tall and had enough teeth to staff a dental school. Behind Big Dave came what appeared to be his extended family, all of whom shared his enthusiasm for looking absolutely terrifying. The surviving students immediately began what could charitably be called preparation for honorable death, but which looked more like panic in multiple languages simultaneously. Vex was reciting what sounded like insurance information. Quinn had found his species' traditional death pose, which involved a lot of chest puffing and dramatic arm gestures. Blorks was actually looking happier than anyone had seen him in days, presumably because his lifelong pessimism was finally being validated by reality. "Well," Marcus said, pulling his backpack closer, "this is either going to work spectacularly or we're all about to become a cautionary tale." "What are you doing?" Vec demanded, watching Marcus rummage through his supplies. "Something that's either brilliant or the last stupid thing I'll ever do." Marcus pulled out what appeared to be a tennis ball, neon green and slightly chewed. "See, I've been reading the planetary ecology reports in my spare time." "You read ecology reports for fun?" Quinn asked, momentarily distracted from his death preparations. "Netflix was down," Marcus shrugged. "Anyway, turns out Big Dave and his family aren't actually apex predators. They're pack hunters, highly social, and according to the behavioral analysis, they've been exhibiting signs of social isolation for the past few decades." Big Dave was now close enough that his footsteps were causing minor avalanches, and his roar was making everyone's teeth rattle. "Social isolation?" Blurks gurgled. "What does that mean?" "Daily means," Marcus said, winding up like a major league pitcher. "They're lonely." He hurled the tennis ball in a perfect arc toward Big Dave, who stopped mid-charge, tracked the ball with eyes the size of satellite dishes, and then did something that redefined everyone's understanding of physics and biology. Big Dave caught the ball at his mouth. Gently. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet usually reserved for religious experiences or moments of severe head trauma. 4 stories of concentrated destruction and evolutionary overkill stood perfectly still, tennis ball clenched delicately between teeth that could have crushed diamonds. Then Big Dave's tail started wagging. It was a tail the size of a subway car, and when it wagged, it knocked over several trees and caused what geologists would later classify as seismic events, but it was definitely wagging. "Oh, who's a good boy?" Marcus called out, walking toward Big Dave with the casual confidence of someone who had clearly lost his mind. "Who's the goodest giant world-ending predator? You are." Big Dave dropped the tennis ball at Marcus's feet, sat down with an impact that registered on the planetary seismographs, and made a sound that was probably supposed to be intimidating, but came out more like a purr crossed with a diesel engine. The rest of Big Dave's pack, seeing their alpha engaged in what was apparently playtime, began exhibiting behaviors that the Academy xenobiologists would spend years trying to classify. Rolling over, playful pouncing. One of them actually started chasing its own tail, which created a localized windstorm. "I don't understand," Vex whispered, afraid to speak any louder. The behavioral models all suggested extreme territorial aggression. The behavioral models were probably written by people who never tried throwing them a ball, Marcus replied, scratching Big Dave behind what might have been an ear and was definitely the size of a garage door. "Look, every social species needs interaction. These guys have been stuck on this planet for who knows how long, with no visitors, except terrified students who immediately try to run away or fight them." He threw the tennis ball again, and Big Dave bounded after it with the enthusiasm of a puppy, if puppies were large enough to have their own weather systems. "They're not trying to hunt us," Marcus continued. They're trying to play with us. The difference is pretty important from a survival standpoint. Quinn, who was slowly emerging from his death pose, stared at the scene unfolding before them. You're telling me that the most feared predator in this sector of the galaxy just wanted someone to play fetch with? Well, yeah, I mean, look at them. Marcus gestured to Big Dave's pack, who were now engaged in what appeared to be an interspecies game of keep-away, with a boulder the size of a small house. They're pack hunters, which means they're social. They're intelligent, which means they get bored. And they're the apex predator on a planet where the Academy drops terrified students who immediately try to run away. He paused to throw the tennis ball again, which Big Dave caught with a coordination that shouldn't have been possible for something his size. From their perspective, we're not prey. We're the first intelligent life they've encountered that might actually stick around long enough for a conversation. Blorks, who was watching a creature capable of ending civilizations roll over for belly rubs, made a sound that might have been laughter or a complete mental breakdown. So, the survival course with a 90% failure rate could have been solved with a trip to the pet store. Pretty much, Marcus agreed, producing more tennis balls from his seemingly bottomless backpack. Though I prefer to think of it as applied social psychology with a focus on interspecies communication. As Big Dave and his family settled in for what appeared to be the galaxy's most dangerous game of fetch, the remaining students began to realize that everything they'd been taught about survival might need some serious revision. And Marcus, sitting in his lawn chair with a creature that could step on cities purring contentedly at his feet, began to wonder if maybe the Academy's real problem wasn't their survival techniques. Maybe their real problem was that they'd forgotten how to make friends. Commander Throck's arrival on the final morning was supposed to be a somber affair. In 40 years of teaching survival courses, he'd never had to collect more than 3 living students from Kepler 442b. The evacuation medical bay was prepped, the trauma counselors were on standby, and he'd already begun composing the incident report that would inevitably question his teaching method. What he found instead was an interspecies barbecue. Marcus had somehow converted his portable camping stove into a full cooking station and was flipping what appeared to be locally sourced meat patties while Big Dave held a makeshift spatula in his massive jaws. Terror and his wolf pack had organized themselves into an efficient serving line, and even the carnivorous plants had been repurposed as natural serving bowls. Thompson, Throck's voice carried across the impromptu festival. What in the name of the 7 hells is going on here? Marcus looked up from his cooking, wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the cook, but mind the apex predators," and waved cheerfully. "Oh, hey, Commander, perfect timing. We were just about to start the closing ceremony." The surviving students, all 12 of them, were seated around what had once been the galaxy's most dangerous ecosystem, sharing meals with creatures that should have eaten them 72 hours ago. Vex was engaged in what appeared to be philosophical discussion with a crystalline formation that had previously been classified as aggressively territorial. Quinn was teaching a pack of smaller predators how to play cards. Lorix was actually smiling, which was documented by Marcus's phone as potentially the first recorded instance of Globanian happiness in galactic history. "Where are the casualties?" Thrak demanded, consulting his tablet. "My instruments show that 47 students were deployed to this location. I count 12 survivors. What happened to the other 35? "Oh, they got evacuated," Marcus said, flipping another burger. "Mostly during the first 2 days. Turns out the standard protocols don't really work if you haven't bothered to understand the local environment first." He gestured to Big Dave, who was carefully arranging condiments with the precision of someone who took food presentation very seriously despite having claws the size of traffic cones. But the ones who stuck around figured out that survival isn't about fighting everything, it's about making friends with the neighborhood. Throck stared at the scene before him. In 4 decades of teaching, he'd seen students face death with courage, panic with dignity, and occasionally achieve the basic competence necessary to survive hostile environments for 72 hours. But he'd never seen anyone turn a Class 7 extinction event into a social gathering. "Thompson, do you understand what you've accomplished here?" Marcus considered this while adding cheese to Big Dave's burger, because apparently even planet-killing apex predators had dietary preferences. "Well, I've got a solid B+ in interspecies communication. I've documented about 40 new behavioral patterns that'll probably revolutionize xenobiology, and I've made some really good friends who happen to be capable of ending civilizations." He paused. "Oh, and I've proven that the Academy's survival course could probably use some updates." Throck's tablet beeped with an incoming message from Academy Command. Then another, then 17 more in rapid succession, as the implications of what he was witnessing began filtering up through the bureaucratic hierarchy. "Thompson," Throck said slowly, "how would you feel about a teaching position?" 6 months later, the Galactic Survival Academy's main lecture hall was packed with the most terrified group of instructors in the galaxy's history. Marcus stood at the front of the room, still wearing his camping gear, while behind him a holographic display showed the new survival course statistics: 0 casualties, 98% completion rate, and somehow a 5-star rating on the Academy's student evaluation system. "Welcome to Human Survival Techniques, or as I like to call it, how to pack a proper picnic lunch for hostile environments," Marcus announced cheerfully. "Today's lesson is Chapter 1, Why Everything Wants to Kill You and How to Convince It Otherwise." In the front row, Commander Throck was taking notes with the desperate intensity of someone whose entire worldview had been fundamentally restructured. Behind him, instructors from 17 different species were frantically scribbling down everything Marcus said, occasionally stopping to confirm with each other that yes, he had just suggested bringing snacks to a Class 5 Deathworld. "Now, who can tell me the first rule of interspecies survival?" Marcus asked. A nervous Chitauri instructor raised one of his 4 hands. Don't die?" "Close, but that's more of a desired outcome than a strategy. Anyone else?" "Silence." Marcus sighed and pulled out a familiar tennis ball. "Rule 1. Everything is just trying to get through its day, same as you. Rule 2. Most problems can be solved with food, games, or polite conversation. Rule 3. Always pack more snacks than you think you'll need." He tossed the tennis ball to Throck, who caught it reflexively. "Your homework assignment is to spend this weekend on Kepler 442b, putting these principles into practice. Big Dave specifically asked me to tell you he's looking forward to meeting you all. He's been working on his fetch technique." The sound of 43 instructors simultaneously reconsidering their career choices filled the lecture hall. "Oh, and one more thing," Marcus added, shouldering his trusty backpack. "The Academy cafeteria has agreed to start serving those root vegetables Terror's Pack discovered. Turns out they're delicious when prepared properly, and apparently they're a good source of nutrients that most species need." He headed toward the door, then paused. "Class dismissed. Try not to overthink it. The universe is a lot friendlier than you'd expect once you stop assuming everything wants to eat you." As the instructors filed out, still clutching their notes and looking like they were heading to their own executions, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Vex, who was now serving as the Academy's first director of interspecies relations. "How did the first class go?" it read. Marcus typed back, "About as well as expected. I give it 6 months before they stop being terrified of their own students." His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Big Dave, who had learned to text with surprising dexterity for someone with claws the size of small trees. "Ready for next weekend's camping trip?" Marcus grinned and typed back, "Already packing the marshmallows." Outside, the Galactic Survival Academy's new motto was being installed above the main entrance, replacing the old "preparedness through adversity" with something that better reflected their updated philosophy. It read, "Survival is 90% attitude, 10% snacks." Marcus had suggested adding and 5% frisbees, but apparently the Academy's board of directors felt that was statistically confusing. He'd work on them,